Experiment time. Today I'm going to test a method for making sourdough bread more sour. I came by this method kind of by coincidence. It's a fun story. Hi, I'm Sune, and I'm a food geek. Yes, I know it's been a long time, but this is the third experiment in the making your sourdough bread more sour. I found out about this because Henrik from the Bread Code sent me a parbaked bread to try out, but instead of it being an overnight delivery from Germany to Denmark, it got stuck in a facility over the weekend, and I couldn't actually get it until the following Monday. And then life happened, and I couldn't actually brown it until the following evening. So the bread that came out of the package looked absolutely gorgeous, albeit very light in color. So the only thing that I had to do was finish the browning, leaving me with at least a somewhat freshly baked bread. So I did that and it looked great. I let it cool down and then sliced off a couple pieces so I could sit down with my girlfriend and try out the bread. We first tested a slice that was just straight off the bread and then another one that was nice and brownly toasted, just like we both like it. We first tested the fresh slice and it was overpoweringly sour. Even the toasted slice was so sour that it was just unpleasant. So that made me ponder on how that happened. Another strange coincidence, one of my viewers of the channel, Paul Ranoni, wrote me with his findings on getting sour sourdough bread. And it mimicked what I had seen in the bread from Henrik, and it had more details, so big props to him for sending that to me. So here's the gist. Bake the sourdough bread until it's about 93°C, 200°F inside, and then let it cool down, and then brown it afterwards. That leaves much more residual sourness in the bread. Just don't wait 5 days like I did. So my experiment is this: a controlled bread which has been baked the normal way, one that's had 1 hour of rest before browning, one that's had 2 hours of rest before browning, and one that's had 24 hours before browning. If you're new to this channel, I bake a lot of sourdough bread and I make delicious food from all over the world. If you want to see more of this content, please join me by subscribing and ringing the bell so you won't miss any future videos. So the dough is my standard experiment dough. 80% bread flour, 20% rye flour, 80% hydration, 20% inoculation, and 2% salt. Also, your starter has to be made very sour. Basically feed it 3 to 5 times at 1 to 1 to 1, and every time that the starter peaks, you leave it until it gets very sour. This is best done at a high temperature at say around 28 to 30°C, 82 to 86°F. If it's not very sour after say 24 hours, you need to leave it longer. The reason this works is because of a substantial amount of the sour starters being transferred to the next feeding, making it more sour every time. Also, if you want a really pungent one, use rye flour instead of wheat, or maybe a 50-50 mix for a bit more balance. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider becoming a member at Patreon. You can also buy some merch or use the links in the description for tools and ingredients. Those were the words. This is the experiment. This is not a recipe, it's an experiment. If you want to learn how to make sourdough bread, I recommend that you go watch my master recipe. Link is in the description. First, I mix all the ingredients for the dough. Then I leave it to rest for an hour, then 3 sets of stretch and fold spaced out by 30 minutes. Then the dough goes into a bulking container and into the proofer until it's grown 50%. Then the dough is divided and each piece is shaped into a light ball. Then each ball is final shaped. Then the loaves rest in a super cold fridge until baking. When it was time to bake, I came up with a schedule to both make sure that the times from steaming to browning were correct, but also to spend as little time baking as possible, because, you know, I'm a busy man. The bake will have to be split into 2 days, because one bread has to rest for 24 hours after it comes out. So I broke every speed limit to be home on time from work. Nah, just kidding. During the steaming of the 24-hour bread, I tested the bread for internal temperature to make sure that I got the first part of the bake right. Luckily, it fit the 35 minutes, but otherwise I would have updated the schedule. So first I prepare the loaf for the 24-hour bread. Dust it, flip it, score it, and then I bake it. I tested the temperature 3 times during this bake. Unfortunately, the first test was at 20 minutes where I'd usually uncover, but the bread was still so soft and unbaked that I squished the top. Nothing that will impact the taste though. Just before the 35 minutes are up, I prepare the 2-hour bread. Then I take out the 24-hour bread and leave it to cool. And then I add the 2-hour bread to the oven. And then I bake the 2-hour bread. I prepare the 1-hour bread, take out the 2-hour bread and leave it to cool. And then I put the 1-hour bread in the oven. After that's almost done, I prepare the control. I take out the 1-hour bread, add the control. After 20 minutes, I uncover the Dutch oven and let it brown for 25 minutes. I take it out and let it cool. And then I had a little time to take a breather before the 1-hour bread had been cooling for an entire hour. While I was waiting, I heated the oven to 260 degrees Celsius, 500 degrees Fahrenheit, to be able to brown faster, hopefully without heating too much of the middle of the bread, killing off the sour taste. And then I put the 1-hour bread into the oven for 10 minutes. Then I took it out of the oven and let it cool. Then I had another 20 minutes until I could put the 2-hour bread in the oven. Then I put the bread in the oven. After 10 minutes, I took it out and let it cool. All right, then everything waits for 24 hours. Before putting the bread in the oven, I made sure that the oven was properly heated to 260 degrees Celsius, 500 degrees Fahrenheit. And then I put the 24-hour bread in the oven. And after 10 minutes, I take it out. All right, all of the 4 breads are ready, and even though this isn't a crumb experiment, I know you guys love the crumb reveal, so let's do it. And now for the all-important sniff and taste test. First, the sniff. Smells very familiar as I've baked this bread hundreds of times. Very bready, and a controlled amount of sourness. Smells wonderful. This one seems a bit muted, but the same notes. This one seems to smell very much like the control. This one is much more pungent, but it doesn't seem overpowering though. Alright, let me taste them. The controlled bread tastes as I would expect. Wonderfully bready, slightly tangy. The earthy and the malty notes from the rye is coming through as well. I love this bread and will never tire of eating it. Okay, there really isn't much difference between this and the controlled bread. Maybe a hint of more sourness, but that's it. Alright, this is somewhat more sour, nothing crazy, but you definitely feel the zing on your tongue. Let's try the last bread. Wow, that's something else. If you want your sourdough bread to be sour, this is the way to go. It's not overpowering, but it's certainly much more sour than I'm used to. I'm sure it'd pair well with certain food items, spicy, meaty, or fatty things, where you'd maybe use lemon juice to cut through the richness. In this case, the bread would take over that role. Interesting. So the 24-hour bread was pretty sour, but not unpleasantly so. And the 1 and 2 hour breads were only marginally more sour than the control bread, which had some sourness, like any sourdough bread usually has. With regards to baking time, if I were you, I'd test your own oven to see how long it takes for the internal temperature to get to 93C 200F. But in my oven, it's about 35 minutes at 230C 450F. So if you really like sour sourdough bread, or you just want to tweak your bread to be a bit more sour, now you have a really good controllable method. If you want to parbake though, and you don't want it to be sour, you should aim for an internal temperature of 99C 210F. That seems to kill off most of the sour taste. I hope you learned something today. See you next time.